When I was a kid, the disaster we worried about most was a nuclear war. Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. But we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We're not ready. We're not ready for the next epidemic.
China is battling a new and rapidly spreading respiratory virus. The number of people infected has tripled to more than 200.
In a span of just 72 hours, more than 150 cases of people infected with a newly discovered coronavirus have been reported in China.
China is urging its citizens not to travel abroad as it struggles to contain the virus that has now killed more than 100 people.
We will do everything in our power to keep the infection and those carrying the infection from entering our country. We have no choice.
China's deadly, never-seen-before coronavirus has now been found in 4 other countries, including the United States.
The novel coronavirus has been identified now in 13 countries.
A quarter of the world's population is now living under some form of lockdown due to coronavirus.
Being male, older, and having some existing medical conditions increases a patient's risk of dying.
94% of people who die from the coronavirus had underlying health conditions.
We begin tonight with the sobering milestone, a once unimaginable number. President Biden now marking 1 million lives lost here in the U.S. to COVID.
Experts from around the globe are evaluating what would happen and what we would need to do in order to prepare for a virus that could claim up to 20 times more lives than the COVID-19 pandemic.
This is what it looked like: fear, empty streets, overwhelmed hospitals, families saying goodbye through screens. The pandemic turned the world upside down in a matter of days and weeks. But in America, there was something that didn't make sense. This is the so-called land of innovation, the leader in healthcare spending, but the outcomes were among the worst, if not the worst. The COVID-19 pandemic arrived almost exactly 100 years after the last major worldwide pandemic, known as the Spanish flu. And during that 100 years, the United States steadily became one of the unhealthiest nations in the world. Very early on in the pandemic, something became abundantly clear. The decline of our health had finally caught up with us, and the cost was astronomical. This is the story of how America lost the battle with COVID-19 before it even began. And there are some hard questions that we all need to answer. What if it wasn't entirely the virus's fault? What if our own choices, our priorities, our systems, and our way of life were at the root of the problem? Did this pandemic have to be that bad? Could more lives have been saved? And with the inevitability of another pandemic on the horizon, will we be ready this time?
So there's a school of thought that what COVID really did was rip the veneer off of an already ongoing health crisis in our country. And it exposed a level of unhealthfulness within the population that was there, but that people just ignored or got used to.
The reality is that prior to the pandemic, no one was talking about the number of people who have a heart attack every single day. You know, those numbers are staggering. I think in America, something like every 30 seconds, somebody has a heart attack, you know? It's staggering.
Well, heart disease is the #1 cause of death in America. And that's not just for America, but worldwide. It's #1 in pretty much every country around the world. And the rates of heart disease is climbing. The rates of obesity is climbing as well. The last statistics I saw was that approximately 41% of Americans are obese.
Do you know that just a couple of years ago, I think it was, that the statistic was released that over half of the population of the planet is either overweight or obese. And of course, in developed countries, the number is even higher. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I've seen statistics that morbid obesity is the fastest growing portion of our country.
In today's Health Smart, the CDC has released statistics that show people in more states are larger than ever. Here's how obesity rates looked in 2012. They range from low to moderate, with no states having an obesity rate above 35%. Now fast forward 10 years and the rates skyrocket above 35%. It's worse in Oklahoma, Louisiana, and West Virginia, where more than 40% of adults are considered obese.
So how many people are really obese? It's a problem for all of us. I've watched it through my career just go up and up and up. It was 15-25% of the population was obese. No, it's pushing up into the 70% mark now. People in America that are obese.
And we know that obesity was associated with higher fatality rates of individuals that had COVID. We know heart disease, that was the leading killer, and it still remains the leading killer, although cancer is projected to overtake heart disease as the #1 killer in a few years. And for a number of states, it's already done that. And we know that all of those are associated with lifestyle factors.
As far as how ill were we before COVID, we were already very ill. The obesity rate has never been so high. Diabetes has never been so high. But now it's gone up astronomically. If you add on to all of that anxiety and depression and the risk factors those are for all of these other conditions and bad health outcomes, we are really in a bad place.
So approximately in total, about 34 million Americans have diabetes, and that includes those who are diagnosed and those who are undiagnosed.
We have much more serious pandemics going on than the COVID-19. We have more people dying in this country from the complications of either diabetes or heart disease than we do from COVID. And I'm not meaning to minimize the danger and the threat of a viral infection, but it's like we've gotten so used to being so sick that that's how we think we are.
I think one of the most concerning things about this epidemic of chronic disease is that we are seeing it in children. And we're seeing it not only in children, but in infants. And when it happens in children and in infants, it is much more devastating. It's a much more difficult thing to treat.
In our morning rounds, the alarming rise in childhood diabetes. Type 2 diabetes was once known as adult onset because it was so rare in kids. But not anymore. With 1 in 5 school-aged children considered obese, the rate of type 2 diabetes in young people is climbing. The newest study shows an almost 5% jump over a decade for those between the ages of 10 and 19. Some experts warn the number is still rising.
This is not something we talked about 20 years ago, and it is heartbreaking to think that now in this country there are about 20,000 children who have type 2 diabetes, 5,000 new cases a year.
People talk about the school to prison pipeline in inner city schools, but one thing people don't talk about is the cafeteria to hospital bed pipeline. Because when you think about the way we feed our school children, we are indoctrinating them into a diet that is guaranteed to cause disease by the time they reach adulthood.
I was finishing my master's degree in 2006. And when I was doing my practicum, I had to do student teaching again. That fall, when they were orienting the teachers to the new school year, and they said, if you're a teacher or an assistant, you got to learn to use these pens, because we're expecting a 600% increase in diabetes in our classrooms. This was K through 5. K through 5. This wasn't adults, it was K through 5. And that's what they said they were expecting that school year. And that's how the increase had gone up that much. And that was in 2006. I don't think it's gotten any better.
I think most people know that we have never had such a condition where so many people are chronically ill. There is an epidemic of chronic illness in this country. And the problem with it is that most people accept it as just a way of life. When I get older, I might get cancer. When I get older, I might get heart disease. And these numbers are just increasing. And so how can you sustain this?
Prior to the COVID pandemic, how would I characterize the general state of Americans' health? I would say it's terrible. and that the way Americans are encouraged and even trained to eat primed them for being decimated by a pathogen like COVID.
You heard it for yourself. There's an epidemic of chronic disease in the United States. From kids to seniors, people are getting sicker and sicker every day. Since the 1918 pandemic, the health of America has continued to decline. This reality left us wide open for COVID-19 to hit us as hard as it did. But did America's health really have that much of an impact? What does the data show? How much of this HealthDemic made the pandemic worse?
New tonight, data from the CDC shows just 6% of COVID-19 related fatalities in the U.S. listed the virus as the sole cause of death.
So that means 94% of people who have died with COVID had other contributing factors. But medical experts say this does not mean the virus is any less lethal.
94% of people who die from the coronavirus had underlying health conditions.
94% of patients who died from coronavirus also had other health conditions and contributing causes.
Pre-existing conditions.
Pre-existing conditions.
Hypertension, diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease.
So if you go back to 2020, August of 2020, you saw that 94%, and the news was reporting it. All the stations were reporting it in that month for just about a week, that 94% of the issues and that had the worst outcomes were because people had pre-existing conditions, or what we call comorbidities. That means they had hypertension, there was obesity involved, there was heart disease involved. These types of issues were the real underlying conditions that caused people to have these terrible fatal outcomes.
The overwhelming number of deaths occurred in people who had at least 4 comorbidities. So really these are people who were unwell to begin with.
We saw the numbers that were so high, and then here was the thing that was the worst part of it. That story went away, vanished, and no one talked about it anymore.
I think we saw a profound impact of COVID, particularly in the US, because of how many chronic diseases that we have. I like to refer to it as the double pandemic, like the silent pandemic of chronic disease, particularly diabetes and obesity, causing underlying inflammation, and then you have this virus come in that is primarily inflammatory. So what do you have? You have double inflammation. So guess what? You have double complications, you have double mortality.
If we just take common sense, if an individual is compromised in one area, then that leads to a weakness of the system to be able to handle other stressors on the system in other areas.
Well, throughout the pandemic, health officials have warned that COVID could be more severe for people with additional medical issues. A new CDC report now brings obesity into that mix, something that really comes as no surprise to doctors here.
Dr. Kim Onufrak with the City County Health District says this report from the CDC didn't surprise her.
It's something that we've seen, and it's something that we know. I just don't think the general population knew it, but medical professionals, we knew.
The report shows over 50% of national COVID-19 hospitalization patients were obese or overweight. The battle against COVID-19 continues, and until we get down to 0 hospitalizations and 0 deaths, everyone should continue to take care of their health.
I'm going to tell you about my experience in the ICU. By the time the patient hit the ER, they're going to respiratory failure. They have to be put on a ventilator. And over the next 3 to 4 days, more often than not, they just get worse and worse. Their organs start to fail, and eventually they die. And invariably what happens is grieving family members come to us as doctors, and they're like, what happened? She was fine last week. And what I think, but can't say, is that no, she wasn't. What happened? 300 pounds happened. Last week, she looked like she was okay because her body wasn't being challenged, even though it was already working at maximum capacity. Her internal environment was flooded with all of these stress hormones that made her susceptible to going into multi-organ failure with even the slightest challenge. And the minute their bodies were, they got pushed over the edge and died very quickly because they didn't have the reserve to fight off the disease.
If you've got 1 hit, well, that's one thing. And you've got 2 hits, well, that's something else. And you've got 3 hits, and now you add something on top of that. well, it just compounds it. It becomes more and more problematic.
So if we consider that, especially early on, the majority of the people that were passing or having severe issues from the COVID had other metabolic conditions. So if there hadn't been all of these metabolic conditions like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and this type of thing, it probably wouldn't have been as scary of a pandemic as it was.
There was a big need to just address all the underlying issues that have been accumulating over decades, that haven't been addressed at all. In the messaging, nutrition and lifestyle was completely missing. So that's why we wrote a few articles that were published in leading medical journals, highlighting the importance of lifestyle and nutrition, and so that people would feel empowered. They would feel like they can do something in order to change their odds of getting COVID-19 and its complications.
So the pandemic absolutely did expose this much broader healthdemic in our culture and in our society. And it made it clear that the way Americans eat and live has really turned us into a very sick and vulnerable population.
You can't argue with those numbers. 94% of the people who died during the pandemic had multiple comorbidities like diabetes and heart disease. Think about it. They were already fighting battles their bodies couldn't win. And here's the thing. Most of these diseases are fueled by one simple thing, a fork. So much of it comes down to how we live and how we eat.
When it comes to making decisions, as life and death important, as to what to feed ourselves and our families, then there's really only one question. What does the best available balance of evidence say right now? I have scoured through the medical literature at all the randomized controlled trials. The single most effective intervention like that ever published in the peer-reviewed scientific medical literature, a whole food, plant-based diet. That works better than anything else studied to date.
When you look at what the average American eats, or the average Westerner, they eat a diet that is centered around dead animals and dairy products, all of which have been shown to be detrimental to optimal immune functioning and to actually increase inflammation in our body, which makes us more prone to being susceptible to infectious agents. We are being trained by the marketing from food corporations to treat eating as though it were some kind of dietary field trip to an amusement park. In other words, people approach a meal with the idea of how much pleasure can I obtain from the stuff that I'm planning to eat.
There's something called the SAD diet, the standard American diet. We now live in a society where the majority of the food that is purchased from the grocery stores is not food at all. Ultra-processed foods, things in a box, in a can that you basically could get from the corner store. But these things are really promoted and pushed onto American society, and people have bought it hook, line, and sinker. And because of that, our health has suffered as a result.
Your immune system has to fight a war. It's like if the United States went to war with Russia. Well, if it's only fighting one country, has a good chance of winning. But if Russia, China, and a couple other nations attacked us all at the same time, we're gonna be in trouble. Likewise, if your body is being challenged by COVID and a bunch of comorbidities, you have a much greater chance of succumbing to that infection than if you didn't have those comorbidities. So the point is we gotta get those things hopefully under control and reversed to give our body the best chance of fighting off a challenge like COVID.
Again, it's clear to me that we lost the battle in this COVID pandemic before it even got started. That's a fact. You know, we came to a gun battle with a knife and we lost.
With the understanding that there was an existing problem with how Americans were using their forks and knives, it was shocking to see this happen in the middle of the pandemic.
For many, it was a moment to celebrate.
I don't think I can overstate how excited we are right now.
Krispy Kreme announcing this week a free donut every day this year for anyone who could show their COVID vaccination card. But then some started weighing in on donut weight gain. One doctor writing a donut a day could result in 15 extra pounds by the end of the year. Others questioning the heart health of the deep-fried treat.
Francesco's Pizzeria, a family-owned pizza shop where mom works in the kitchen and the dough recipe is over 100 years old, is hoping to encourage people to get vaccinated. Today, from 1 to 4, with proof of vaccination, you could get a free slice of pizza. 12 News caught up with the owner to see how the event turned out.
Well, if you didn't know, April 20th, or 420, is the unofficial holiday celebrating marijuana. And to celebrate, Governor Cuomo legalizing the recreational use of pot, activists handed out free joints today to those who could prove they got the COVID vaccine.
Yeah, they call it Joints for Jabs. These activists handed out the joints in Union Square Park to adults who had an official vaccine card. It was part of a nationwide vaccination drive. And of course, at 420 this afternoon, they did throw a big smokeout celebration.
As the country works to get more Americans vaccinated, more incentives are being rolled out, like free beer. Anheuser-Busch announcing today it is launching a new campaign to buy Americans 21 and older, of course, a round of beer when the nation reaches 70% vaccination goal by the 4th of July.
A free donut,
a free slice of pizza,
free joints,
free beer.
During the middle of a pandemic that compromises the respiratory system, during the middle of a pandemic that was being fueled by pre-existing conditions, people were giving out weed, alcohol, pizza, and donuts, among other things, potentially adding fuel to the fire of pre-existing conditions that was already raging out of control. Even if the intentions were good, the messaging was way off, encouraging the habits that had already compromised the health of so many. Instead of reinforcing the importance of strengthening our bodies against disease, the focus remained on short-term incentives rather than long-term well-being. The message inadvertently downplayed the role of nutrition, exercise, and overall health in disease resilience. Instead, it reinforced the very habits that had left so many vulnerable in the first place, and there was a cost.
We begin tonight with the sobering milestone, a once unimaginable number. President Biden now marking 1 million lives lost here in the U.S. to COVID. Behind every number is a loved one lost, a family changed forever. And there is another staggering figure in all of this. For every 4 COVID deaths in this country, 1 child has lost a parent or primary caregiver. More than 250,000 children who've lost a parent.
1 million people. When you hear that number, it should make you feel sick to your stomach. But that number alone doesn't tell the full story. Here's the real story. From early 2020 to early 2025, roughly 7 million people worldwide died from COVID-19. And out of that number, the United States alone accounted for 1.2 million deaths. That's 17% of the global death toll. Now here's where it really hits hard. The United States makes up just 4.1% of the world's population. Think about that for a moment. 4.1% of the population accounted for 17% of the deaths. That's not just a problem. That's a crisis. And the truth is, we need to ask ourselves, how different could things have been if we were healthier as a nation?
So if everybody had been living a healthy lifestyle before COVID came around, we would not be looking at this as we do currently. There would be hundreds of thousands of individuals that we lost that would still be around. Yeah, they'd still be around. The impact that a healthy lifestyle would have, even just from an immunological standpoint, getting through an infection is huge.
The relationship between pre-existing conditions and serious risk from COVID is very real. It's very clearly real. The statistics are there. It's also clear to me clinically that if even those people who had the pre-existing conditions had quickly addressed natural approaches to health that included optimizing their diet, getting appropriate exercise, not too much, not too little, that included getting proper rest, etc., even in their pre-existing condition, they would have not been anywhere near at same risk. They would have been at much lower risk. And then we add the simple remedies or early treatment strategies available on top of that, there would have been no pandemic.
Would it have made a difference if people had somehow magically woke up and were like, I want to make changes. I want to do something different in terms of my lifestyle. It would have been it would have been nothing more than, oh, it's flu season.
We already knew that what you eat, what you don't smoke, and what you do with your feet, forks, fingers, and feet, right? Just those three factors would reduce about 80% of all of the non-communicable diseases that we have across the United States. And what would that do from an infectious standpoint for a population that's already really bad? Well, if we had gotten all of that together, it would have been so much better as well. And there would have been many, many, many individuals that would be alive today that aren't.
So at this point, we know that over 1 million Americans have unfortunately succumbed to the COVID pandemic. And based on what we know about the role of comorbidities and especially plant-based diets conferring protection against COVID, I can say with confidence that if the majority of Americans were plant-based in their diet and lifestyle and weren't suffering from comorbidities, which they'd be much less likely to if they were plant-based, that something like 940,000 of those people would likely still be alive. And that's heartbreaking when you think about that.
And if I had to Monday morning quarterback, I'd say, let's recalibrate. Let's change that paradigm. And let's begin to help people to understand how lifestyle choices ultimately affect not just your health, but as we saw in the pandemic, whether you live or die.
If the health of America was in a better state pre-COVID, there should be no doubt that hundreds of thousands of deaths could have possibly been prevented. Before we knew anything about COVID, Dr. Anthony Fauci had this to say about what we should be doing before and during a pandemic.
And the best way for me to prevent getting an infectious disease and having to have you as my doctor is what? Wearing a mask?
No.
You do that? If I can see they're ready to sneeze or cough, walk away.
You avoid all the paranoid aspects and do something positive. A, good diet. B, you don't smoke, I know. I know you don't drink, at least not very much, so that's pretty good. Get some exercise. I know that you don't get as much exercise as you should.
That's correct.
Get good sleep. I think that the normal, low-tech, healthy things are the best thing that you can do, David, is stay healthy.
All right, well, I'm going to try to do that, and hopefully when I next see you, I will be even healthier than I am today.
What would the outcomes have been if this was the messaging shared to the public during the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond? We know that as a nation, we were not healthy when the pandemic hit. But could a healthy lifestyle actually have saved lives during a pandemic? To help answer that question, we can take a look at several studies that were published while COVID was raging. These studies examined areas around the world named blue zones. One study in particular even highlighted that the elderly people living in one of these blue zones experienced extremely low rates of severe COVID, even though they were a part of the most vulnerable populations. I think we can all agree that this is something we need to understand. So what are these blue zones and why are they so special?
Yeah, so blue zones. There was a study, it was Dan Buettner. He was trying to find different populations in the world where there were concentrations of individuals that lived to 100 years of age or longer, centenarians.
I've looked at these geographically confirmed and demographically defined areas where people are living longer. There are 5 of them, at least 5 that are naturally occurring. It's Okinawa, Japan, longest living women. There's Sardinia, Italy, longest living men up in the highlands. There's Greece. There's the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica. And then there is Loma Linda, California, and surrounding areas where they have a large concentration of Seventh-day Adventists.
And the epidemiologists that he was working with, while they were looking at pinpointing these different locations, well, they used a blue marker encircling the areas that they'd found epidemiologically where these high concentration populations were, so that he could then go there and he could look at those populations, try to figure out what's going on, what are similar factors in these different populations that lead to individuals living to 100 years of age or longer.
We found America's longest lived population among the Seventh-day Adventists concentrated in and around Loma Linda, California. They celebrate their Sabbath from sunset on Friday till sunset on Saturday, a 24-hour sanctuary in time, they call it. And they follow 5 little habits that conveys to them extraordinary longevity, comparatively speaking.
And so he went around looking at these different populations and, looked at various different factors that were similar amongst them all. There was a strong social structure. They tended towards a plant-based diet, a decrease in alcohol consumption, and eating a diet that shied away from processed and was more natural. And they naturally had a more active life and lifestyle. Many included rest as a part of it as well. So some of them, it might have been a siesta. Some of them, it might have been kind of an afternoon. They take a long meal together and talk and all that kind of stuff. With the population in Loma Linda, it was Seventh-day Adventists, and they have the Sabbath, so they take off a 24-hour period in a 7-day week. And in the United States, Loma Linda, it's interesting because you're in like smog capital of, you're outside of LA. But Loma Linda is in the middle of all of this smog, and yet they got all of these centenarians that are there. What's going on with that?
And that's why it's so interesting to me, because you find that, as I mentioned, Okinawa, Japan, longest living women. That's their distinction. And Sardinia, Italy, longest living men, their distinction. But Loma Linda, California is very different because it's not dependent upon gender. It's not dependent upon race, or it's not distinguished by that. It's anybody who actually, and we come full circle back to those same health principles, that when they are actually, a part of your lifestyle, you don't have those comorbidities, you don't have those issues, because they have the lowest rate of diabetes, the lowest rate of heart disease. They have the lowest of all the lifestyle issues. And it's mainly because they follow those principles.
All right, so the lifestyle factors that individuals should know about. There's several different acronyms that are used in order to help to remember it. One of the ones that I learned early on was NewStart: nutrition, exercise, water, sunshine, temperance, air, rest, and trust in God.
If we implemented all these principles in the American society today, we would see significant improvements in the health outcomes in general, but also regarding the COVID-19 pandemic.
Those are the 8 principles that the Adventists can emphasize on. However, I like to complement that with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine Foundation 6 pillars, which is pretty much physical activity, stress management, restorative sleep, avoiding risky substances, and social connectedness.
True preventive medicine is making sure that we have in place as a maintenance protocol things that keep us healthy and help prevent illness or disease from taking place. One example is the 8 natural remedies. And each of those natural remedies has a very special place in optimizing our health. Most of us have are the things we like the most. We're really good with diet, but might not be so good with exercise. Or, man, we're really into fitness, but, don't talk to me about my diet. Or we might be good at both of those, but we are horrible in our sleep habits. Okay, or we might have hostility in our lives. We don't have any forgiveness in our lives, and so forth.
Current scientific evidence really shows that the 8 health laws are universal and are also backed up by science. For example, the importance of rest and having enough sleep. Even when people were getting vaccinated, those who were sleep deprived had only half of their antibodies compared with those who had a full night of rest. The same for the underlying health conditions. When people were smoking, when they were overweight, if they had high blood pressure, their antibodies were much lower compared with healthy people.
During the height of the COVID pandemic, I'm working in ICUs with people who have active COVID, people who are dying from COVID. That was one of the most harrowing experiences of my medical career because I had never seen human beings dying at that rate. I mean, it scared me, quite frankly. And I'm in the room with these people, I'm treating them, examining them. So the studies back up my own experience that being plant-based confers protection. How long does it take for that protection to accrue? Within days. You stop eating the things that damage your immune system and you begin to eat the types of food that build up your immune system, help you develop the kind of natural protection that we can have from foods. The benefits are almost immediate, again, within a week.
Each person is different, but what we have seen when it comes to something like diabetes, in 11 days we can see quite a significant impact on the blood glucose levels, just with adopting a plant-based diet, getting improved sleep quality and sleep quantity, going for walks after meals, we call that after meal exercise, and dealing with stress. And I want to specify that we're talking about type 2 diabetes here. Usually as well, when it comes to high cholesterol too, within a week, persons can see some good improvement in their values. Weight loss as well, the higher the values are when you start is the more improvement that we often see, whether it's very high blood glucose levels, very high cholesterol, or very elevated blood pressure levels.
I became interested in health when my mother got really ill because she had heart disease, the #1 killer in America. She was on multiple medications. She went to a lifestyle center, a sort of an alternative, to use that word, kind of experience where they just put her on a plant-based diet, just did the very basic, simple things, and she took her medications from 18 down to 2 in just 21 days. I say there's something to this.
I tell folks this oftentimes, especially my medical colleagues. I say, I have made some mistakes in my practice of intensive lifestyle medicine. And the two that come to my mind are both cases where I failed to cut the medication fast enough and the patient had adverse effects of excessive medication dosing. It can change, the dosing can change and sometimes in one day.
What's so cool though is that you can reverse the irreversible because of the way God created our bodies is that all cells have to basically go through their life cycle and then you get new cells. And so even though you can't reverse this damage to the cells, eventually those cells will die and be broken out and you make new cells. So you can actually lower that hemoglobin A1C blood test dramatically in a period of even a month, okay, just by going on a good lifestyle program. Putting it all together, you can have a dramatic improvement.
The process of reversal begins when you start changing your lifestyle. And the degree to which you make a change in your lifestyle has a direct impact on how much change you get in the disease process and how fast you have a change in the disease process.
The public needs this information. People need to understand that whether it's before a pandemic, during a pandemic, or after, vaccinated or not, it's always the right time to start making changes that can lower the risk of severe outcomes in a crisis. And this isn't just about reflecting on the past. It's about what's ahead. The truth is that there are already rumblings that something is on the horizon. Many experts are sounding the alarm that something else is coming, and we need to shift our mindset now, embracing preparedness over panic. Because waiting until the next crisis hits may just be too late.
What I'm about to say next may sound alarmist. Healthcare professionals across the world are gearing up for a new potential pandemic, a pandemic which they say will be known as Disease X. Disease X is a legitimate health scare. The next unknown disease of epidemic potential. It's not known what this disease will be. But one thing scientists are certain about is this. Disease X is coming. They don't know when, they don't know how. What they do know is that it could be far worse than the Wuhan virus, that it could cause more deaths than the Wuhan virus, and that it could take us years to recover from it.
This probably is not going to be the last pandemic. In fact, those who in some ways prophesied that the COVID-19 pandemic was coming are now prophesying that there's something else that's coming that's worse.
We first used the term Disease X in 2018, and we used Disease X as a placeholder for a disease we don't even know about yet. COVID-19 was a Disease X.
Disease X is a term for a hypothetical illness, one that has not happened and is currently unknown. In the scenario, experts from around the globe are evaluating what would happen and what we would need to do in order to prepare for a virus that could claim up to 20 times more lives than the COVID-19 pandemic.
Still, the world is not prepared for a pandemic. The cycle of panic and neglect is beginning to repeat. The painful lessons we learned are in danger of being forgotten. But if we fail to learn those lessons, we will pay dearly next time. And there will be a next time. History teaches us that the next pandemic is a matter of when, not if.
You heard it for yourself. It's not a matter of if, but when. And here's the sobering part. We've been here before. For almost a decade, health agencies and government leaders have been running these so-called pandemic preparedness exercises. As far back as 2018, Johns Hopkins conducted one called CLADE X. It was a one-day simulation where prominent experts in national security and epidemic response role-played U.S. government leaders navigating a fictional pandemic. Then came Event 201. Same idea, another exercise by Johns Hopkins. This time in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And a few months later, the COVID-19 pandemic hit for real. And now, here we are hearing about Disease X, a potential next pandemic. This isn't just something for governments to take seriously. It's a wake-up call for all of us to start thinking about how to prepare and protect ourselves so we don't get blindsided again. What you're about to see is that we've actually had a playbook for what to do during a pandemic. There's a story from the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic that most people don't know. But everyone needs to hear this story because it could literally mean the difference between life and death.
You know, in preparing for future pandemics, you have to look back at history, for instance. And all throughout history, you can see that the major health outbreaks are due to lack of sanitation and hygiene and an understanding of how the body works.
Now, as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to grow, so are the parallels being drawn between it and another deadly virus that struck the globe more than a century ago. We're talking about the Spanish flu, which began in the spring of 1918 with one case in the state of Kansas. By the end of 1919 and the First World War, the pandemic had killed as many as 100 million people worldwide. How does what we're seeing now with this outbreak and the response compare to the 1918 Spanish flu?
The Spanish flu was the worst pandemic to ever hit this world. My understanding is that it killed anywhere from 25 to 50 million people. People don't know exactly what that number was. In this country alone, it's estimated that about 600,000 people that died. In some areas, like for instance, I believe it was Western Samoa, that was pretty much decimated. And in Alaska, entire villages were wiped out. There were so many funerals that were happening that these funerals could only last like 10 minutes or so. So every 10 minutes you have a new funeral. And so it must have been very chaotic.
The 1918 Spanish flu devastated so many individuals. The main challenge with it was that it started out like, just, I'm not feeling good and I can't go out tonight. And then all of a sudden, a few days later, they're feeling better. And so they decide, I'm not really feeling totally well, but let's go out on the town. Let's go do this. Let's go out to eat or whatever. And they stress themselves a little beyond what the body was capable at the time, and they're dead the next day. So that was the biggest problem with the Spanish flu, is that it was the rebound. It was the individuals that didn't really take heart, say, I'm going to make sure I get better and fully recuperate before I get back to work or get back to a normal schedule.
What they ended up finding out is that if you delayed treatment, things did not work out very well. So it was important to get right on top of it. Now, there were several institutions that were what they called sanitariums. And so these are essentially early hospital-like systems, but also are very focused on using natural remedies, lifestyle interventions, and so on as the basis of their treatment.
So the sanitarium numbers were incredibly interesting. So these are people who immediately went to the sanitarium, over 1,000, 1,100 cases of influenza, and only 11 people developed pneumonia. That's incredible. Comparing that to the military hospitals where 2 to 3% developed pneumonia. And then in the military hospitals, of those who got pneumonia, 40% of those, they had a 40% mortality. In the sanitarium, they had 1% mortality. So they had six people there. That's incredible, the difference there.
I have always been interested in the immune system and how to optimize the immune system. So maybe 15 years ago, I was doing a lecture on ways to optimize the immune system. And after my lecture, a pastor came up to me and said, "Hey, have you ever heard of the story of the Hutchinson Seventh-day Adventist Seminary in Minnesota?" And I said, "No, I haven't heard of that." So he told me the story, and I got him to promise to send me the newspaper clip. And the key principles here are so critical that many still lose sight of what they were. Now, there was no medicines available. So Dr. Larson, he basically is the first example over 100 years ago of what we call a multifactorial early treatment protocol.
What the Adventists were doing, so the Life and Health article from W.A. Rubble, which was one of the physicians then, probably the most detailed report of the different numbers that existed. So they collected all of those reports. And what were they doing? That's the big question. Like, how do you get numbers like that? What are you doing? So they were doing the hydrotherapy. So they were doing primarily the chest fomentations, hot and cold to the chest.
And anyone else who had actually learned those methods was having amazing success, whether it was up in Canada, whether it was in Michigan. There was some statistic where of some 200 people who actually came down with the Spanish flu, they only lost like one person. And all they did was use simple methods of hydrotherapy.
These people were not telling fairy tales. This actually happened. And the reports from 1918 have been hiding in the archives for over 100 years. This is a section from a publication in 1918 discussing the success of the Hutchinson Seventh-day Adventist Seminary. The article is entitled, "Seminary Cinches Flu. Hutch Institution Makes a Record Combating Disease." Their success was so stunning that the health officer of Hutchinson City stated that no public institution in the state of Minnesota had up to date made a record in handling influenza, the worldwide pandemic that had swept millions into their graves, like that to the credit of Hutchinson Seventh-day Adventist Seminary. They had so much success that the health officer said that their treatments made other methods of treatment seem irrational. There were similar reports from a periodical named the Review and Herald, highlighting many other Adventist colleges that were having success, including Kingsway College, Andrews University, and South Lancaster Academy, just to name a few. All of them had the same pattern. They were pretty much exclusively vegetarians, and for those who got infected with the Spanish flu, they used hydrotherapy and made sure that everyone had adequate rest. And the results speak for themselves. There were over 200 students that got infected at these colleges, and there was only one death. These reports not only underscore the effectiveness of their methods during one of history's deadliest pandemics, but it also compels us to ask, are these treatments still relevant today?
Yeah, so those 1918 methods from the Spanish flu were very key in helping us with treating COVID as COVID came around. As the medical director of a lifestyle center, knowing that we were going to be encountering COVID at some point, that was actually part of my research, was looking to see what had happened in prior pandemics and how it had been treated, what had been found to be successful in putting together treatment protocols for individuals in a novel infection that we don't know exactly how it's, going to behave. We had to act with little information, which is common for emergency medicine. And what they found in the pandemic back in 1918 was if you don't treat early, the outcomes are horrible.
The key is early treatment. The reason people died in any pandemic is because they did not properly seek out early treatment, or they simply didn't know. And so that's why my main message is to make sure that you take the time to seek out what the appropriate early treatment guidelines would be. And that's where we failed utterly as a public health and medical system, not only in America, but all the way around the world. People died because of the lack of knowledge. And so that's why you got to do early treatment as soon as you have the first symptom. And the most important early treatment in my thinking is to activate the depressed innate immune system with hot, cold temperature back and forth, 3 to 5 minutes hot, 30 to 60 seconds cold, back and forth 3 times. As soon as you're done with that 3-part series of hot and cold, you dry off completely and bundle up, get in bed or bundle up with blankets and stay in bed for at least 20 minutes. And that's what stimulates the immune system. We call it spontaneous blastogenesis. The B cells that make antibodies just dramatically increase, and there's a activation of antibodies against that specific virus that otherwise would not be destroyed.
So I just want to illustrate to you just how powerful hydrotherapy can be, okay? So when I went to a lifestyle center to learn about natural remedies, and they had just shared how powerful this was during the time of the Spanish flu, I thought, I'm gonna see how well this works. Because I believed it, and so I thought, who can I work on that I can help with this? And I thought, I will help people who have failed antibiotic therapy. And I remember I was working in the OR, and one of the scrub techs was going home early. And so I asked her why she was doing that. And she told me that her son had a very high fever, and he'd had this high fever for about a week and had just been diagnosed with pneumonia, and it wasn't responding to antibiotics. And so I told her, well, you could do hydrotherapy. And I told her how to do it. One of the ways is to do it with fomentations, the way they did it during the Spanish flu. But a very easy way that you can also do it is with hot and cold showers.
What I do is I do it the simple way. I jump in a shower, do 3 to 5 minutes hot, right on the chest or the back, just as hot as I can take it, so like I'm uncomfortably warm. My body's sweating even though I can't tell because I'm in a shower, right? But so you feel like, oh, you can't wait till you turn it to cold. Then turn it all the way cold. And I mean all the way cold, okay? As much as you can. And do that for 30 to 60 seconds, just kind of turning around in the shower. Ooh, and that'll light you up, right? But the cold, even independent of the heat, actually activates your adaptive immune system.
And she said, well, I don't know if he'll do it. He's only 15 years old. He's a teenage boy, but I'll tell him. And the next week I saw her, and she said that her son, when she told him that a physician at her surgery center told her about this, he tried it. After the shower, he got into bed and he said, I think I feel a little better. And he woke up the next morning afebrile. And I saw so many people that that this type of thing happened on, like right after doing hydrotherapy, their fever would go away. They would be able to go back to work. I became a believer.
So I had a lady come in today to our little clinic here, and she ended up being positive for COVID. And so I gave her a hydrotherapy treatment today, chest fomentations. It's very same thing as what the Adventist physicians would have done in the 1900s with the flu pandemic. But it just anecdotally, it's able to nip it in the bud when you're able to do those hydrotherapy treatments in just the first day or two of the illness. Once you get it later on, your immune system has already taken a hit. So you can try to shorten the illness or, try to decrease some of the symptoms of it at that point.
You can do it in your shower. Contrast shower can raise the white blood cell count by 400% for up to over 24 hours. I will clarify for the skeptical professionals that might hear this that we're not talking about 400% more white blood cells. We're saying we have 400% more in circulation. Many of our white blood cells are marginated at rest along the blood vessels most of the time. But when we get an infection or we get sick, they're mobilized. Well, this treatment mobilizes them before you get that sick. And so that's why these treatments are especially effective if applied early in the disease process.
So for the first 5 to 7 days of a viral illness, adaptive immune system, especially in the case of COVID, was suppressed. It just kind of went into inactive mode. And that allowed the virus to replicate unchecked to the point that after a week, it's got you. Now early treatment's not going to work as effectively.
So what hydrotherapy will do is that a lot of times people don't understand that even if you're on the right antibiotic, that when you're fighting a battle, that there is going to be casualties. You're going to have cells that die, and that may cause a lot of issues in addition to the inflammation that's already there. And so what hydrotherapy does is that it causes your blood vessels to open up when you're putting hot water on the area, and then it'll cause the blood vessels to close up when you're putting the cold water on. And so there's kind of this pump mechanism, blood going in and out of the area. So that's one way that it works, especially if you sleep for about an hour after you do this hydrotherapy, you can boost that immune system by even 7 times.
And anybody that treated early are going to have the same success and even greater successes than occurred during the Spanish flu. And they didn't even have these other simple remedies available to them. We have so much more available to us. Now, if we learned anything through this pandemic, is that viral illnesses are actually really easy to treat, okay? If you know what you're doing and you apply it early.
We were one of the first to put together treatment protocols for COVID for individuals who were at home and looking at treating themselves at home, because there was absolutely nothing as far as recommendations for what to do.
People were being told, if you have COVID, wait until you have certain symptoms, then go to the hospital. And then when you go to the hospital with these really severe symptoms, we'll hospitalize you, you might need to be intubated and this kind of thing. And it's just way too late for people. I think for people to know that they have options, it just gave them so much more hope and so much more, it took away the fear for them to know I can actually do something about this and I don't have to wait until I can't breathe anymore.
And so we saw people getting well quicker that were receiving these hydrotherapy treatments. And there is science for it. There are articles showing that hyperthermal treatment strengthens the very part of the immune system that's weakened by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And so it makes perfect sense that it can be quite effective.
It might just be time to take a closer look at these rediscovered methods and consider how they could become a crucial part of our preparation. Some may be thinking, that was then, and this is now. Hydrotherapy may have worked in the past, but is it still relevant today? Does it have a place in modern medicine, or is it just an outdated remedy? To put it to the test, the search led to Wildwood, Georgia, home to a lifestyle center that shares its name. This center operates much like the sanitariums of the early 20th century, continuing the tradition of holistic care and natural remedies. Here, the same principles that once helped countless patients recover during past health crises are still in use today. But the real question remains, are they still effective? At Wildwood, first-hand accounts were gathered from individuals who had faced COVID-19 and made remarkable recoveries.
It was the same kind of treatments in 1918 that I took that really made a big difference with many people back then. Because of the condition of my lungs, it was necessary to start these treatments immediately. Anytime I catch anything, we start it immediately. I was affected with a lot of weakness. I have emphysema, COPD, and the doctor told me I only have about 60% of a man my age of ability for the lungs to work. So the first thing we did was she gave me hydrotherapy treatments, hot and cold, and we did that twice a day. And I believe that was what protected my lungs. The oxygen level was dropping down into the high 80s, but we were able to get through it by taking those hydrotherapy treatments.
The outbreak that took place on campus here took place somewhere around the summer, spring, summer of 2020. So that would have been maybe June, July. I remember more on a personal level, I got COVID in July, and I was one of the earlier ones that had it. So now my background, for some of the reasons why I would have been concerned about COVID, I had cancer before. I had T-cell lymphoma, and that affects your immune system. And what would happen if I have COVID? Would that cause any problems, reaction? Could it be deadly? That kind of thing. Wasn't sure. As soon as I even thought the possibility that I had COVID, I started with natural treatments right away. So how important do I think the early treatments was? I think that was huge. And the reason why is I got COVID again after a few years. And I treated it like it was very light. Yeah, because my first experience was very light and it was almost like my COVID vacation. But then when I didn't do treatments and when I wasn't as diligent, it was like, oh, this thing is not going away, and oh, I'm feeling really sick and I feel horrible and I am having all the symptoms and everything else. And so I realized, oh, the difference was the early treatment and the consistent treatment.
Think about this. In a scenario where hospitals are overwhelmed and people can't access treatment, this kind of information about boosting the immune system simply cannot be ignored. It worked back in 1918, and the evidence highly suggests that it still works today. But water wasn't the only simple element aiding recovery during that time. In the 1918 pandemic, some military hospitals turned to a surprisingly unconventional approach. Faced with overcrowded wards and scarce resources, they moved their patients outdoors. Under the open sky, these makeshift fresh air hospitals saw recovery rates soar and mortality rates plummet. So what was it about being outdoors that made such a difference?
Okay, true or false? Sunlight kills the virus.
It does. That's the truism. That's one of the reasons why outside in the sun, when you are interacting, that is much, much better than being inside.
A key example relative to the 1918 Spanish flu is that individuals that had spent plenty of time outside in the fresh air, in the sunshine, especially those who had spent time during the year out in the midday sun. It takes a midday sun to generate vitamin D from sunshine. The ability to generate vitamin D in the skin from sunlight requires the sun to be above 45 degrees in the sky. So that's mainly a summertime event. The key here is that if you basically built up the energy reserves of vitamin D in your body during the summer, then now you have reserves that can hold you through the winter. So individuals that had been out in the sunlight prior, building up their vitamin D levels, would have been protected by the acute damaging consequences of the Spanish flu, which was the cytokine storm, which is after the viral infection phase, then you have the inflammatory phase or the rebound bacterial infection phase. And so those who had high vitamin D levels not only did better through the early phase because they were able to minimize the viral replication, but the vitamin D in the body was able to suppress the super inflammatory events of cytokine storm. So that's why even young individuals that were otherwise very healthy and fit were fine in the morning, dead by evening. That's reported frequently. My suspicion is they did not have the reserve of things like vitamin D in their bloodstream to help protect them from that cytokine storm.
But there are two vitamins that you should consider. For example, if you are deficient in vitamin D, that does have an impact on your susceptibility to infection. So I would not mind recommending, and I do it myself, taking vitamin D supplement.
When we look at the utility of vitamin D, there's clear evidence that individuals that are vitamin D deficient have increasing problems with all sorts of conditions. So if you're vitamin D deficient, you're more likely to develop diabetes. You're more likely to have struggles controlling your diabetes while you're diabetic. You're more likely to have problems with cancer. You're more likely to have problems with heart disease. You're more likely to have problems with bones and bone health. There's all sorts of things that are associated with it. If you can't get out in the sun and the sunshine because you're locked up, well, at least supplement. I think the last time that I saw a national average of vitamin D levels was somewhere around 22, 23, something like that. Normal begins at 30, and ideal is really around 60 to 75 as far as the blood levels of vitamin D is concerned. So America is like way down here. So yeah, does it have an effect on immune health as well? Yes, it does. It does.
The bottom line with vitamin D was this. A huge meta-analysis published in 2021 showed that if you kept your blood levels of vitamin D above 50 nanograms per milliliter, that your risk of actually dying of COVID, even if it was the Delta variant, the worst variant of all that's now completely gone, the risk of dying of that COVID would be near zero. And that's including if you had predisposing conditions.
It was unfortunate and it was heartbreaking to watch all these people, struggle with the virus and eventually die in many cases, because these deaths were unnecessary in many cases. Had they realized their condition, a few months earlier, they might have turned things around.
Diet, exercise, water and hydrotherapy, sunshine, and vitamin D. All of these are generally accessible to most people in the United States with minimal cost, and could have made a massive impact on the health of Americans from every walk of life. But unfortunately, long before COVID-19 had swept across the globe, the health of America was already in decline. Decades of poor lifestyle choices, processed foods, lack of exercise, leading to skyrocketing rates of diabetes and heart disease, created the perfect storm. When the virus hit, it struck hardest at those whose bodies were already weakened by these preventable diseases. And yet, history has shown us another way. In 1918, those who lived healthier lifestyles fared better. Now, what if we had truly taken those lessons to heart? The reality is that everything we need to improve our health was and still is right in front of us. But instead of embracing these lessons, we find ourselves at a crossroad. Our medical system, built to treat symptoms rather than prevent disease, failed us during COVID-19. The system wasn't prepared for the pandemic, and it's certainly not equipped to prevent the next one. A system focused on sick care instead of health care. We've been treating the symptoms for far too long, ignoring the root cause, which is our way of life. What we need is a system that doesn't just manage a health crisis, but helps us prevent them. One that tackles the underlying issues of lifestyle diseases like diabetes and heart disease. Because when the next pandemic hits, the question won't be if we're ready, but how prepared have we chosen to be?
I learned this story early on about the difference between intervention and prevention when I was in medical school. And the story goes, these two guys went out to the river. Ostensibly, they were planning to just spend the day fishing. And as they were getting set up, one of the guys looked out in the river and he saw this person coming down, screaming, "Help me, help me, I'm drowning." And he dragged that person back to the beach. As soon as they got back to the beach, here comes someone else. Same thing, "Help, I'm drowning, save me." He goes out, swims out, grabs that person. As soon as they get back to the beach, here comes a third person. His partner suddenly starts running upstream and he screams at him, "Wait a minute, aren't you gonna stay here and help me fish these people out of the river?" He said, "No, I'm going upstream to find out who's pushing them in." And that kind of encapsulates the difference between prevention and intervention. And so the issue I had was, yeah, they were very good at telling people if you had these problems, you're more susceptible, but they didn't tell people what to do about it. That was a major problem.
From my perspective, we haven't addressed the underlying causes that made the pandemic in the US worse, or that made it the underlying inflammation, the underlying chronic diseases. So how can we expect to meet the next pandemic any better than we met the last one?
I do not currently see our medical and public health system as learning any of those lessons. So it's on us to make sure that we're learning the lessons and we're applying those both preemptively as a primary preventive strategy, but also for secondary prevention, which means as soon as we have any early indication of a problem, immediately incorporate the simple remedies. We've learned a lot. We now know more about treating viral illnesses than we ever knew before. This information has been available for decades. It was just never incorporated. The mistake that we cannot make again is to withhold this information from the public. We need to let the public know immediately, okay, what simple remedies can be used to quickly fight off the epidemic that can turn into a pandemic. If we do that, we're going to be okay.
This journey is far from over. There's another part of the story that still needs to be told. One that takes a hard look at the healthcare system itself and just how sick it's become. That's coming soon, so stay tuned. But for now, the focus is on action. The information is here, but knowledge alone isn't enough. It's time to put these lessons into practice, to take charge of our health, and to prepare for what's ahead. There are no guarantees in life. We can do all the right things and still get sick. However, when the next crisis comes, and it will, the overwhelming evidence is that those who are ready will stand the best chance of making it through. So start now, learn, apply, and be ready.